So if you look at this city, where can you hang out without being on private property? Well, there's in the downtown area, there's really two places. There's the street itself, and so the city has put benches along Broadway. That's okay, but there's not enough of them. What cities are doing in San Francisco and other places, New York, is they're creating informal places where they're putting out chairs. I mean, look at Broadway in New York City. They closed down part of the street and they just put chairs out, and all of a sudden everyone was hanging out and sitting around and just enjoying the atmosphere, and they're lingering, and they're spending money too. So that particular piece of real estate isn't turning over dollars, but the real estate all around it is.
Right.
And we don't really have enough of that. So that, to me, is something the comp plan, and I've already made this point to the people working on the comp plan, should be focusing on. Where can we have some more informal seating in this city, particularly during the summer, where there's just not enough benches. And those are low-cost kinds of things. Get people to hang out and not just walk by. But the other way you do that is by creating urban plazas. And we don't have really an urban plaza here. We have Congress Park, wonderful park. But a park and a plaza are a little bit different. And a plaza would be more hardscape. It would be smaller potentially and framed by active urban buildings. And that means not blank walls, but buildings where there is life going on, where there is commercial along the edges of a plaza. And it would seem to me that at the end of this block here at Lake Avenue would be a perfect spot to have a small urban plaza. Now, I've seen alternative plans to this proposal that lay out more of a green space park-like idea. I mean, that's okay, but it seems to me that that's kind of a common fallback to landscape architects. There's always going to be these trees plopped down and a stream running through it. But, we have Congress Park. And we have, areas over behind the building here where the farmer's market is that have some of that. Maybe there's a way to link that together that would work and have maybe a little bit of a green strip, but it doesn't necessarily have to be green. It could just be a space that gets people, invites people to congregate.
Right.
And to me, that's something we should be talking about in this city as well. So if we can fill in some of the urban fabric, but very consciously leave a space of that urban fabric for people to just hang out. And now, the city, in owning a piece of real estate, has the liberty, or should be in a position to do that as opposed to a private property owner. You're not going to get a private property owner to not get the highest use of their property. They're not going to say, here is this public plaza of my piece of real estate, go ahead people, hang out and enjoy yourself. No, that's the city's function as the public entity. And so, I don't know the exact real estate ownership of the whole strip here to know who owns what, but even, there's always creative ways of exchanging and working this with developers. But a parking garage right here, I guess my question on the parking garage is, why is it here and not up there? Why not put the parking garage up next to the Hilton if they need more parking? Because that's not going to impact the streetscape, because there is no streetscape in the back part of the Hilton. It's a big surface parking lot that is framed by trees, and the backside of it is the Route 50 arterial. So if they want to build a parking garage, do it up there. And that way it doesn't affect the urban fabric, and we leave this open to develop.
One of the ideas that Jane Jacobs talks about in The Death and Life of Great American Cities is the idea of keeping eyes on the street. And that's a central component of what she's unpacking when she goes through the idea of mixed use. And the idea there is that if you have a combination of commercial use, office use, civic, municipal structures, public use things, and then also residential, all in one little area, then you're going to have a whole bunch of different things going on at once, and people are going to be interacting with each other. And that's going to create a sense of safety in a public space that is in some ways monitored organically by the public. And that seems to me what you're sort of getting at with this notion of a plaza that's part of a kind of mixed-use facility that goes up here, as opposed to something like a monostructure that only serves one purpose.
Yeah, in part. I mean, the other thing that point that Jane Jacobs makes is that it's not necessarily everything's going on at once, but everything's going on throughout the day and night, so that you have some things going on at night, some things going on at the day, but there's always something going on, so to speak. So that's part of it, but the idea here of filling in the urban fabric so that we have, one of the things I also think that the city of Saratoga has struggled with, and is still not necessarily getting it right is growing up, is becoming a city and not a village. And how do you do that? And how do you do that in a kind of, a smart way? I mean, if you look at the geography of Saratoga Springs, it's the old village that was incorporated into the old town. And so you have a very large space with a core that's really the urban fabric that people think of as Saratoga. And in the 80s and 90s, a lot of development took place in a completely suburban form on the outskirts, away from the core, in a completely auto-oriented kind of pattern, and cul-de-sacs, and out near the lake, and out in just scattered areas, on the eastern part of the town.
North Broadway as well.
Well, North Broadway you're up into Wilton, so you're into the adjacent town.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry, I meant South Broadway.
Somewhat, but not really, because there's not a lot of residential in that way. But I'm talking about residential developments that are completely auto-oriented, that that were justified in the terms of this is the free market operating, and you're providing high-end suburban-like housing close to a city, auto-oriented housing. But it's turned around and created new demands. So one of the conversations around here is now there's an extra 10 minutes for the fire trucks to get out there. So now the taxpayers have to subsidize those big houses out in the outskirts in a way that says, well, we got to bring services out there now. So that's not really respecting the urban form, in my opinion, that kind of growth. The infill that we've seen around here, though, quite frankly, I think has been great. And I think there's been a renaissance of urban development. Some of the key developers around here, like Sonny Bonacio, I think have done a great job of doing infill development, market-driven infill, in a way that a lot of cities around the Capital District would love to have. And there's some of that starting to spring up in Troy, and some is happening down in Schenectady and in Albany. But a lot more, I would like to see it in the other cities besides Saratoga. But Saratoga, because of the dynamics of Saratoga, of course, one of the issues with Saratoga Springs is because of outside money in the track and just the nature of Saratoga, it's become too pricey for the average person to own real estate here. Even if you have a decent middle-class job, if you're out on your own and not at least pooling two incomes, it's very tricky to own, real estate here without having a lot of money in the bank, because there's not enough of Saratoga's product. And so that's expanding beyond the immediate topic here, but
Right. Well, let me pull up the next question that I had for you. I was wondering if you could say a bit more about the design principles that inform your view of what comprises good urban planning, and can you tell us just a little bit about the tenets of the new urbanist philosophy that you're a part of?
Okay, well, my personal connection to the new urbanism is really growing up in a small walkable city. So I didn't come to the new urbanism thinking it was new. I came to the new urbanism saying, that's the way I see the world and the way I grew up seeing the world. Growing up in the small city of Amsterdam, a half hour from here, a little Milltown city, but we had neighborhood schools. I walked to school from when I was in third grade. I walked to middle school, and of course the city started doing things by the time I got into high school that started to undermine all the things that I enjoyed about the city. So I used to be able to walk to the downtown, and there were movie theaters down there and whatnot, but urban renewal knocked them all down, and 100 buildings were destroyed to put them all in the middle of the street, like I said. The other thing is they moved the high school out to the town. So now instead of walking to school, we had to be bused to school. So it was this example of trying to, of suburbanizing the city itself. But the idea of being able to walk to school and have neighborhood schools, the idea of being able to walk to a corner store. So in my residential neighborhood, I could walk just a block away, and this was a quiet residential neighborhood. This was not, big city kind of setting, and there was two confectionaries, a pizzeria, a small grocery store, and those became the center of my childhood and all of the kids in the neighborhood's childhood. Was the fact that we could walk to those stores, buy baseball cards and football cards, buy a yo-yo, look at magazines, buy Mad Magazine, whatever it was that we started getting into as kids, hang out and put money in the jukebox and start hearing music that was being played, and play pinball and order some pizza free, and all those things were elements of the urban fabric that were the best elements of my childhood memories in that area. Along with the fact that there was baseball fields and a park-like setting on the other side of my block that I could walk to, that is public space. So when you take the mixture of residential housing near commercial and not having to be driven. You know, when you think about kids that grow up in a suburban setting where they have to be driven to the mall in order to buy those baseball cards, right? Or if they get out of their cul-de-sac onto the arterial, they're taking their life in their hand on their bicycle, right? So I was able to, in a connected grid pattern, that's one of the key tenets of urbanism is connections, and this idea of having a street grid, which is what makes this great and what makes places in the suburbs like go up here to Wilton or go all around to the adjacent towns or go down to the the Clifton Parks and Half Moons of the world. It makes those unwalkable, and is the reason why people who live there come up here to walk around, because there's no sidewalks to begin with. So creating a pedestrian environment that sidewalks are part of the road, that there's nearby commercial, that there's connections in a grid pattern. And it doesn't have to be a rigid grid pattern. Sometimes, a modification in the grid is what makes it interesting, right? I mean, even people have talked all about Manhattan's grid and how rigid it is, but then you got Broadway going at a cross angle, and it created all these opportunities for some interesting buildings and other, just juxtapositions that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And there's, a whole art of Baroque urban design that goes back to purposely doing those kind of things. And if you look at the plans for, say, Washington, D.C. in this country, and then we have plans for Chicago and other places that have done that, that have put other kinds of patterns on top of the grid to modify it.
Yeah, and I mean, the idea there is not necessarily just to have like a grid pattern in the first place. It's the idea of creating interconnections.
That's right.
If you have roads that cross each other on multiple different fronts, and there's going to and there's easy access from one road to another, then you're going to have an environment in which people can easily walk around and get around the fabric of the city. But if you have like long roads with few intersections with each other, then you're going to have a sense of kind of claustrophobia on that road and of non-integration with the rest of what's going on.
But the truth is that most of the urban planning that's going on in this country and in this region is not of that nature.
Of the latter nature?
It is. Most planning boards in suburban towns are looking at how to disconnect something, how to buffer it. They're approving cul-de-sacs, which are disconnected by nature. That's the opposite of connectivity. So
Right.
smart urban planning is, how do I connect this with what's being proposed and what's here? How do we connect?
Yeah.
But there's a kind of NIMBYism and a general fear of others in this country that says, "Ooh, if something's being proposed next to us, we need to fight it, we need to buffer it, we need to separate it from us." Yeah.
So to bring it back to the topic at hand, that idea of connectivity and of a grid and of things interacting with each other, this parking garage, what do you think?
Well, obviously, this is a border vacuum. This is going, like I said, you're first of all, you've got a business right here, and you're sealing it off from the core of the city. That's a horror to anybody that would be owning a business here. How do you treat your existing businesses in that fashion? That's terrible. And on top of that, it brings back the argument about parking in this city. And this brings me back to a former plan that I was involved with in this city. It was a linkage plan, and it was a downtown transportation plan done, and I'm maybe 8 years ago. I don't remember the exact date any longer. And one of the key outcomes of that plan, because it was anticipating downtown growth, and I'd already looked at the growth that had taken place up to that plan, and it was anticipating more, trying to calculate what the parking demands would be on the city and how to accommodate them. And one of the key recommendations from the plan, from this really top-notch planning firm out of New York City, was that on Broadway, they need to put in parking meters. And that parking meters have been instituted in other locations to help the businesses. That was the whole point of parking meters, was to help the businesses by creating turnover, by making sure that people don't come, say, that work in the business and park in the key parking spot and block it all day long, and then the customers have to circle around and try to find parking. So by keeping a turnover, and the optimal turnover in a core is, about 80-85% capacity all the time during peak times. That way you've got 15% that's circulating, and so the meters allow that to happen in a high demand place like this for the businesses. So, you hear the businesses, they're the ones who will be supporting this parking garage. Because in their view, which is still kind of suburban, we got to let people come in here, park, and walk to my business. They're the ones who fought the proposal for the meters. So the business community on Broadway, no way, we weren't going to have parking meters in this city, and they fought the very mechanism that would help their business, would keep the parking circulated, and it would then cut down on the need to build, you know, a 500 parking spot behemoth.